To you live from the baseball universe in Kansas City, and just want to talk to you this evening on about Black baseball history. This day in Black baseball history. This is a feature that I do, and today we're going to talk about Black baseball history today. Things that occurred on August the 31st, and of course today is August 31st, 2025. I want to thank everybody for joining in. If you join in later, that'll be all right. Be sure and subscribe and hit a like. Just let me know you're out there and that you're enjoying this kind of commentary. Of course, I give a baseball fact, and then with that baseball fact, what I do is give you some commentary based on my over 40 years, 45 years, believe it or not, years of doing baseball research and specializing on the Negro Baseball Leagues. Right now, and I doubt if there's anyone who has more years in providing this kind of information and being dedicated to this cause. Of course, I started when I was about 23 years old, telling the story on Negro League baseball players, and I've dedicated my life to making their stories the stories of your life. And so this is our edition today. So we're going to jump right in here. And since it's August the 31st, let's go this one here. We're going to go ahead. Let's start with something. August the 31st, 1901. And we're going to start with Robert Jordan's one hit of the day, a fifth inning home run with two men on, gave the Cuban X Giants a 5-3 win over Atlantic City and an edge in the season series at Atlantic City before the largest paying crowd of 1901. And let's dive in a little bit. Okay, first of all, Atlantic City. Atlantic City was a great place for African American baseball history to occur. And here's the reason why. You could not play baseball on the Sabbath in New York and also Philadelphia. So Atlantic City over in New Jersey was wide open, and so teams would go over there. There's a famous game where Rube Foster went over there and he was battling Rube Waddell, beat him, and he walked away with the nickname Rube. Up to that point, he was Andrew Foster. Then later on, as most people know him, he became Rube Foster. But that game occurred right there in Atlantic City. In addition to that, they had a famous park there called Inlet Park, and many of the major leaguers would come over, and some of them would use assumed names, some of them would use their full names, and they would play against African American teams right there in Atlantic City. So if you're going to tell the story about Black baseball players and in the East, you must talk about Atlantic City. It's going to be a pivotal place for us to talk about, and many accomplishments happen right in there. All right then. So let's go. Okay, so as Atlantic City, we'll go to August the 31st, 1909. The Minneapolis Keystone pitchers, Jackson, pitched a two-hitter, leading the team to a 10-0 win at Mankato. I think that's Mankato, Minnesota. And what's interesting about that, Minneapolis Keystones, they got organized around 1907. Also, the St. Paul Gophers, they're organizing around the same time. And this is in the upper Midwest. When I first started doing history on the Negro Baseball League, and I think Robert Peterson was out there, but my work was immediately different from Robert Peterson's, because I didn't just talk about, baseball games that happened in Chicago or maybe New York or Atlantic City. What I began to do was talking about baseball that occurred in small towns all over America. And since I came from Kansas City, Kansas, which was a small town and a major baseball city, I saw the value in telling those stories. So I began to tell those stories that really began to proliferate the story of what was occurring outside of those major metropolitan areas. And there were lots of baseball being played because teams from New York or Chicago or even Kansas City, they would play the surrounding towns because town baseball was America's game. And so they would go out and play. And so those games needed to be covered. And even to this day, they need to be covered. in the last 40 years, now I see people writing books about the Minneapolis Keystones or the St. Paul Gophers. the Minnesota Twins playing in the St. Paul Gophers uniforms, or but at one time this was unheard of. And to talk about teams in Texas was really unheard of. But you can guarantee somewhere every year on August the 31st, somebody was pitching a shutout. And of course, the guy named Jackson pitched a two-hitter for the Minneapolis Keystones. Now, what's interesting, when I was doing the research, they didn't mention Jackson's name. I was still struggling to find his first name. And a lot of times, they would mention maybe the pitcher's name. Sometimes they didn't mention the pitcher's name. But they seldom mention these guys' first names. And so if you had a name like Jackson or White or maybe Robinson or Jones, you could be lost to history. Williams is another one. So you could be lost to history. And so what I've tried to do is to recreate this history, and where I could, begin to input the names of these men, because they were somebody who needed to be remembered in this baseball history. And that's the kind of work that I do. All right, so let's go to another one here. Let's go to August 31st, 1917. Rube Foster's American Giants whipped the Indianapolis ABCs at Detroit. It was a doubleheader, 7-0 and 6-4 in both ends of a doubleheader. Dick Redding won the opener, and Richard Whitworth the nightcap. And I've talked about Richard Whitworth before, because Whitworth grew up in my hometown, Kansas City, Kansas. Actually, his wife had just passed away right when I started doing research, and she lived off of 5th Street. 5th Street was a major thoroughfare in our hometown, Kansas City, Kansas. 5th Street, 10th Street. If anybody from Kansas City, Kansas is listening, they'll know what I'm talking about. But those are two of the main, we might say, black business districts in Kansas City, Kansas. Of course, they played at Riverside Park, and Richard Whitworth started at Riverside Park in Kansas City, Kansas. And so he's one of Rube Foster's pitchers. He came out of Kansas City, Kansas, played with the Kansas City, Kansas Giants, then went with the Chicago Union Giants, and then ended up with the American Giants. And later on, he played for Hilldale. But Richard Whitworth, Dick Whitworth, I remember Georgia Dwight, her husband played with, her husband's name was Eddie Dwight. He played with Dick Whitworth. And I've written about this in the book. She used to say that the guy, she used to joke and say that Whitworth traveled with 54 pieces of luggage. And they said it was a deck of cards, 52 cards, and a pair of baseball spikes and his glove. That's what he traveled with, 54 pieces of luggage. That was Dick Whitworth. Ended up being a great one, and we don't talk about Whitworth very much. I tried to highlight him in my book, The Negro Baseball Leagues, Photographic History, that came out in 1992, because, like I said, I knew his family. And actually his son I knew very well. He lived in Chicago, and he attended Kansas University. He was a musician. We used to talk about music all the time. He was a big supporter, and his name was Roger Whitworth. So, and I, of course, I knew his granddaughter, too. So, anyway, this is all history that I've kind of worked through the years, meeting all these people. And so I'm just sharing this information with you. And of course, Dick Redding, who won the first game, man, this guy should be in the Hall of Fame. He should be in every Hall of Fame where there is a Hall of Fame. Just a fantastic pitcher. And he was a World War I veteran, but he's not in the Hall of Fame. And there are pitchers who probably weren't as good as Dick Whitworth, as good as Cannonball Dick Redding, that are in the Hall of Fame right now. So that's a battle that we need to continue to fight, to get recognition for these men who deserve the recognition, because they were simply outstanding in an era where baseball was segregated and didn't allow many of these guys to rise to the top of the entire baseball world, just of the Negro League baseball world. So these are things we can correct. Dick Cannonball Redding, he was in World War I, and they used to call him the human hand grenade launcher, because he could throw a hand grenade and further than the average person, because he was a baseball player, right? So anyway, Dick Cannonball Redding and Richard Whitworth. Those are two guys that I like to talk about. Let's go to another one here. Let's go to August 31st, 1971. Hall of Fame infielder Ray Dandridge is born in Richmond, Virginia. I was fortunate to get a chance to know Dandridge. Dandridge is living in Florida in his last years, and he was able to get in the Hall of Fame. What's interesting is he played in the minor leagues, played in the Negro Leagues, and never spent a day in the major leagues, but he's in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Is a third baseman, and there are not many infielders that were as good as Dandridge that are in the Hall of Fame, especially third baseman. When I think about third baseman, well, I think about Oliver Marcel, and of course my favorite one, Bill Monroe. Bill Monroe was superb, and I think that he's another guy that deserves more consideration, more recognition, and so we like to talk about him as well. So we'll go to just maybe one or two more. How about this one? August. Let's see. We'll go. Let's see. Okay, August 31st, 1919. Louis Santop, the Brooklyn Royal Giants catcher, clubbed 4 hits and stole 2 bases in his team's 8-2 win over the Morris team, and that was probably in New York. And Louis Santop, Louis Lofton Santop, came out of Oklahoma. Actually, he was out of Texas, but he emerged in 1910. He went to Chicago, and from there, he went with the Oklahoma Monarchs, and from there he was spotted. In the next year, in 1911, he ended up with the Lincoln Giants in Chicago. The Lincoln Giants in New York, excuse me. I can't get Chicago off my mind. But yeah, so that was Louis Santop. Now, Santop is in the Hall of Fame. He was a great catcher. They called him Top. And boy, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I might want to talk about on Santop. I do have a picture of Santop in 1941 standing by the bus with several Memphis Red Sox players. I've never released this picture, but I do have it standing with several Memphis Red Sox players, and they're in New York playing, and they're standing by the team bus. And of course, Top ran a bar. He's a bartender in his later years. And I heard that he had quite a collection of photographs. When I first started, I would run into these old timers who, knew him very well. And they used to talk about all the photographs that he had. And so hopefully some of that was saved. I know for me, when I first started trying to write the history of Negro League baseball, I wanted to do a photographic history. And I remember talking to some of the guys who were historians at that time. I remember talking to John Holloway, especially, and I told him I wanted to do a photographic history. He said, you'll never find enough photographs to do a photographic history. Of course, in his books, the photographs were all grainy and things like that. And I knew that I had to find certain kind of photographs. I didn't want like a bunch of teams photographs because it would look like a yearbook. So I had to really dig to find these photographs. Now, what's interesting is I knew something that John Holloway didn't. And this is what I knew. I'm African American. I know our culture, and I know my family who, collect we had lots of photographs around the house predating the turn of the century. And so I knew this. If you can find the families don't throw their families' pictures away. They don't throw a picture of grandpa. They keep those pictures, but you had to find the families. And so that's when I went out to do a lot of interviews, and that's how I found these people. And around Kansas City, I'll tell you, I was a musician, and I don't know, sometimes you'll probably see clips of me playing my trumpet and things like that. Matter of fact, you look closer, you can kind of see that I do play the trumpet. You can kind of see it on my lips sometimes. But after I quit playing music, after I went out and toured around and decided that maybe I need to get a job, this music is not going to pan out like I expected it to. I was on the Chitlin circuit, playing all these different places around the country, and not making a whole lot of money, but having a great time. And so I decided to get a job. And the first job I got was being an insurance man, what they called a debit insurance man. And that was where you went to people's house and pick up their premium. And they had what we call industrial policies. And these were, I served basically African-American community for a company called American National. And so I would go in the African-American community all day long, picking up premiums. And of course, every time I went into an older person's house, I let them know that I also was interested in baseball history, and they began to tell me things. And And I would ask them where they're from, and somebody would say, hey, well, I remember one lady, she was from Texas, and I remember Grady Orange had played shortstop. I had played second base and shortstop for the Kansas City Monarchs, and Grady Orange was a doctor in that town. So when she mentioned that town, I said, hey, did you know Dr. Grady Orange? And she began to tell me about him. And so the thing is, being a debit insurance man, I went all through the community, and I was able to talk to people, and there were people who knew so much about where people were. And of course, a lot of people in Kansas City, Kansas, were not actually from Kansas City, Kansas. They were all from through the South. Most of them from probably Texas, a lot of Arkansas. I remember one family who knew Booker McDaniel, the Monarchs. They knew him down in Morrilton. And so they knew guys when they got there. There was another guy, I remember, he knew the Foremans real well. Sylvester Foreman, Zach Foreman, who played for the Kansas City Monarchs in the 1920s. He knew them real well, and he was from Oklahoma. And he was able to actually clue me in on where these people were, sometimes where they were buried. And I'm going to tell you what, that was the greatest job, not because it paid so well, but it opened up a gate, a world of knowledge that I'm sharing with you tonight. And these are things that happened to me as a young person. I'm still in my 20s. And so my story is unlike anyone else's story. I know there's a lot of people out there now who talk about black baseball history, but guys, you're talking to someone who's lived this, who's lived it differently. And I always tell people, I don't have a job, I have a passion. And that passion has been consistent for over 45 years. Never a job, but always a passion. So we'll go from there. Okay, so you got Louis Santop, but we'll do a couple more. How about August 31st, 1919? Smokey Joe Williams fanned 14 members of the Chevrolet team, winning 7-2 at New York's Olympic Field. Smokey Joe Williams, wow. You can sit by Smokey Joe. I'll just say something real short right now, because I want to try to end this around 20 minutes if I can. But when I was growing up playing baseball and following baseball, Fred Patek played. He came over from Pittsburgh. He was a shortstop, played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and then the Royals traded for him, and he came over and played for Kansas City. And what's interesting is Smokey Joe Williams and Fred Patek come from the same hometown. Patek's white, Smokey Joe Williams was black. And Smokey Joe Williams around the turn of the century, and of course Patek was still playing when I came along. And every once in a while I run into Patek and we'll talk about it. And of course now he knows about Smokey Joe Williams, but he had never heard about him growing up. And so he's really proud that he came from the same town as Williams, and Williams is now a member of the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. And in case you don't know this, I was assistant director of public relations for the Kansas City Royals, so I was able to get to know a lot of those guys. I left there in 1990, so been a few years, so got a chance to know those. Let's see, we'll do one more. This is the last one we're going to do for today. August 31st, 1930. Lefty Wilson, aka Dave Brown, pitched a six-hitter for the Little Falls, Minnesota team to gain a 6-2 win at St. Cloud, Minnesota. His opponent used John Donaldson on the mound. Okay, Lefty Williams, aka Dave Brown. Now this is another story that I brought to the forefront. Now if you go and you do a lot of research now, you'll see that Dave Brown, who was implicated in a murder in New York, he disappeared, and he showed up again in Minnesota, playing under the alias of Lefty Wilson. Now, what's interesting about that, I got this story from several people. One of them was a guy named Favors, who played for the Colored House of David, and the other one was George Giles. George Giles confirmed that story because he played for the Gilchrist Union Giants, and they had several members on that team who had played in Chicago who knew Dave Brown from his days with the Chicago American Giants. And so they knew who Dave Brown was, and of course they're seeing him out there. Now, they never did give Dave Brown up, so he continued to play out in that part of the country as Lefty Wilson, but he was wanted by the police on the East Coast. They just never could find him. I don't think they ever found Dave Brown. So that was a story I broke many, many years ago. And if you look online and you look up Dave Brown, you'll see that he was AKA Lefty Wilson. They just don't tell you who broke the story. And that was from interviews that I had from at least two players. And of course, I did the rest there. Um, so anyway, the rest of the story is history, but that's Dave Brown. And of course, he's pitching against John Donaldson. John Donaldson is a great left-hander. So you got two of black baseball's most outstanding left-handers. Excuse me. And they're out there playing, wow, at St. Cloud, Minnesota. Wow. Now, I've been to St. Cloud. Interesting thing, I was speaking many years ago, and I went to Pipestone. Oh, this has been at least 30 years ago. I went to Pipestone, Minnesota, and spoke there. And then I went over to St. Cloud and spoke there. Interesting thing about St. Cloud, I always like to talk about, Lou Brock played for St. Cloud in the minor leagues. A lot of people don't know that. So these guys got around, so that's a little more modern, of course, but these Negro Leaguers, former Negro Leaguers, just great semi-professional ball players, they were out there making waves long before we started to record this history. And I'm just really blessed that I've been able to tell some of these stories. And of course, if you want to learn more about the things I talk about, of course, you can buy one of my books. One of the books I've been pushing here lately is my last book, all right? And it's Phil Dixon, American Baseball Chronicles, and it's a 450-page turner, man. I'm telling you, it's got a lot of information in here. And I was just at a restaurant the other day, and they had a picture of Bill Pickett, famous rodeo African-American cowboy, on the wall. And I was thinking, in my book, this book here, I talk about Bill Pickett. So how does Bill Pickett come into the history of African American baseball? That's a good question. Well, you had to read my book to figure that out. And that's what I do. So anyway, guys, this is a little bit of what we're doing. This is a holiday, and I decided to come outdoors. It's just sundown here. It's almost dark, but thought I'd do something different. It's kind of like I've been doing my broadcast in the house. I guess you can kind of say that's like playing in a dome. And then sometimes I come out and there's lots of sunshine. It's like playing a day game. So this is almost a night game here. And so I hope you guys are still with me. And so anyway, just want to let you know that I appreciate you and everyone who supported me. And we're going to keep telling these stories, and we're going to make this grow. And I'm pretty new to the social media as far as being live and coming on to YouTube. I've been listening to a lot of people, and I've been hearing a lot of just bad scholarship on the Negro Leagues. So I say, hey, you need to come out here, and best way to set the record straight is to come out here and begin to talk and tell the story like no one else can tell it. And that's the way that I do. Yeah, there's a lot of imitators, but there is one guy who really has been out there and for a long time, and that's Phil Dixon. And so Phil S. Dixon. So anyway, follow me, and you can follow me on my social media. If you go to Facebook, just put in @Negro League Man or Phil S. Dixon, and you can follow me on Twitter or X @Negro League Man, Negro League Man. And of course, I have a webpage too. I need to start working on that as well. And it's NLB, like Negro League Baseball, alive.com. So it's NLBalive.com. Yeah, follow me on all those places, and you'll see where I'm appearing next. And maybe I'll get a chance to meet some of you in person. I would love that. I do a lot of appearances. And one of these days, I'll come on and tell you about my 200 city tour that I did from 2014 to 2019. Hey, that's a feat that will take a while before someone can duplicate that. And so that is part of my history. So I want to go ahead and sign off tonight. I do want to thank you for guys. I see a Thomas Murphy that was in here saying hello. Hello, Ted. I see a Ted Holbrook. And he said, we ran out of food and we ate dirt. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I hope it was nutritious for you. Okay, and then there's a wonton said, hi, my name is, I'm not even sure what you're saying. Anyway, they want to give me a shout out. But I thank you guys for joining in. Seems like every time we do a live broadcast, we get a few more people. So I appreciate that. All right then, guys. That does it for tonight. Boy, we just passed 25 minutes and we just talked about 10 things. So I'll come back tomorrow on Labor Day. And who knows, one of these days I'm going to do an hour live. And I'm going to do some unique things. It won't be like this day. What I'll do is maybe I'll pick a few players and just talk about them. All right. And talk about some of the interviews I had. All right. So thank you, guys. You have a nice night. This is Phil Dixon, baseball historian. Phil S. Dixon, signing out for now. And we'll pick you up later on with some more of this day in black baseball history with commentary by Phil S. Dixon.